Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. I have got a really fun technique today that I am going to call kind of double embossing. So I have some embossing powders here. I tend to keep a really small selection of embossing powders. I have a couple of different golds, a couple of different silvers, clears and a holographic or pearl one or two, but I do not keep any coloured embossing powders. If I want colours, I will stamp with a colour or a pigment ink and then emboss over it with clear. I don't have any black embossing powders. I have very few and I kind of like it that way. As I've said before, I have a very small space. So I'm going to be using some VersaMark sticky embossing ink. I have tried many embossing inks in my time, and this one I keep coming back to. This is the best one that I have tried, and it is worth investing in the re-inker as well because you will use this pad often. It will last you a really long time, but it's also really frustrating when you don't have a nice juicy embossing pad to get the best results. So for today's technique, I'm going to cover this whole panel here. This starts off at being 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I have just covered the whole panel in some VersaMark sticky embossing ink, and then I am putting over a gold embossing powder. Now I do have a couple of little helpers beside me, so you'll see their hands pop in and out every now and then. I am going to melt the whole panel, so I've done nothing special except for emboss the whole panel with one color. This is such a fun technique because you can go for gold and absolutely try out so many different combinations with this one. I had to take a quick break here because some little people wanted to say hello. They love sticking their hands in under the camera and then they magically see it appear on the screen up above them, but they do love saying hello. So I've got a couple of squidgy little pairs of hands here, and they were thoroughly enjoying helping me craft today. So back to our technique. I have my panel here all melted. Then I am going to use a stencil. Now there are so many different ways to do this. I'm going to show you how to do the same thing with stamps in a minute, but I'm going to use my anti-static powder bag, and this is important again. It's just like any other embossing that we're going to do. And I am going to use a little bit of low-tack tape. This is the mint tape from scrapbook.com, and this is just so that my stencil will stay in place because I really don't want it smudging for this technique. I want a nice crisp outline using my stencil. So I'll pop it down over top. And then again, there are a few different ways to do this next step. You could use a makeup sponge, but what I tend to do is I have a domed foam applicator here on the end. These ones are fantastic for ink blending, but I am just going to dab it into my VersaMark ink and then make sure I kind of dab it into all of those little open spaces of my stencil. Now you could probably also just take your ink pad and smush it down onto the stencil as well. So you can just do whatever is easiest for you and whatever you get the best results by, but this way I find pretty easy, and I make sure I get all those little dots that are in between the leaves of the stencil. Then I'm going to carefully peel it off, and now I'm going to choose another color of embossing powder. So for this one in particular, I'm going to use a white satin pearl. Now this is from Hero Arts, and you could use a white embossing powder, a silver embossing powder, or any colors that you have here. I mean, you could use red and make this into kind of a Christmassy sort of card. The options are absolutely endless, and it is so fun. So you can see I just pour the embossing powder on there. I'm going to take off that low-tack tape, and then I'm going to melt this. Now as I melt this, it is going to change color obviously, and when you use the pearl embossing powder by itself, it isn't kind of opaque. You can kind of see through it. So this gave a really interesting result when I did it over top of the gold embossing powder. And to me, honestly, it kind of ends up looking like I've used silver, so that was kind of interesting as well. But as I said, you could do any different colors, and it is really fun. You can layer up as many embossing powders as you want. I had perhaps thought that they might have kind of melted together a little bit more than what they do, but you keep a really clear pattern, which is so interesting because that means that we can use this technique in lots and lots of different ways. And it is really fun to use embossing powders because they really do last a long time. I have heard some people say that they do kind of go off eventually or not quite work as they were originally working. So I have not really experienced that myself, but it does take me a really long time to go through a jar of embossing powder, so I love finding new techniques to use it. So here is the first piece all done and dusted, and now I'm going to show you another way that we can do this technique using stamps. So here I'm going to start again. I'm going to do a similar process by just putting my ink pad directly down onto the paper, and I'm kind of dabbing it up and down rather than dragging the ink pad around because I want to look after my the foam on that ink pad. And for this one I am going to use some silver embossing powder. Now something that I did think would be really cool is if you did several layers of like silver embossing powder first. I pretty much just did one layer and then went on to the next color, but it would be fun to layer them up and see what the result is of that. So that might be next on my to-do list. I am going to melt this whole entire panel, and I wasn't too worried about getting right up next to the edges because I knew that I would probably trim these down just ever so slightly to pop them onto a card front. Now because I want to stamp a really big stamp on this one, I did use some removable tape on the back and I have popped it into a stamping tool. I'm going to use this stamp here, which is called Clematis, and it is a pretty big stamp but is great for things like watercoloring or adding color that way. However, I'm going to use it a little bit differently today to create a really nice kind of clean and simple card. So I am lining it up just like any other stamp that I would use. And again, I'm treating my panel here like any other piece of paper. Even though it is fully embossed in silver, I still use my anti-static powder bag, and then I will ink up my stamp using the same VersaMark ink, and I'm going to stamp it down on top of that silver. Now again, you could use lots of different colors here and your choices are kind of endless, but for this one I am going to use some gold embossing powder that I have. And here I'm just kind of moving it in the light a little bit so I can see if I got a really good impression before I remove it from my MISTI. And I can see that the ink has pretty much got all the spots that I need it to. So I'll pour on my copper embossing powder. And again, because we use the anti-static powder tool, it is not going to stick anywhere that we don't want it to. I'm just going to shake off the excess, and that beautiful image stamped really nicely. And then I'm just going to melt it like I would any other embossing powder. Now you can see that this stamp is a little bit smaller than the A2 size of my card front that I embossed in silver. However, I am going to end up cutting this down as well. And I am going to turn this one into a really nice clean and simple card on this video, because often I will go about making lots and lots of backgrounds, and then sometimes I do get stuck on how I can turn these into a really nice clean card. So I am going to follow through today, and this is the one that we're going to do. However, I did lots and lots of these backgrounds, so I have a whole lot sitting here ready to go. This is a really, really fun technique that I enjoyed doing, and it is not difficult at all, and there are so many options. So I had a whole lot of fun today. I did fussy cut around some of the flowers. It's really easy to kind of follow that nice line down the side, and then I'm just going to cut this off so it's a really nice straight edge, and then cut a little bit from the top and the bottom so that it creates a nice border when I pop it onto my card base as well. And the Tim Holtz trimmer here is a really good sharp blade when I am cutting through embossed panels. And then to finish this off, I'm going to use this old new stamp set. This is the Heartfelt Sentiments one that you guys have seen lots and lots. I am going to stamp on a little banner with some VersaFine Onyx black ink. And then you can see here I kind of orientate it to the left a little bit, but actually in the finished card you'll see that I changed it. I changed my mind and shifted it onto the right hand side. I am using some liquid glue. This is the multi-medium in the matte finish from Ranger, which I pop into these glue bottles. And I know that this is going to be nice and strong to hold down this embossed panel. And you can see there when I cut it down, it leaves that gorgeous little white border around the whole card. As I said, this is very clean and simple, but this is kind of what I felt appropriate for this card today. I have shifted that one over to the right, and I will pop that down with a little bit of foam tape. There is not too much dimension on this card at all because it's just going to go in a normal envelope, and I will hand deliver it. I am going to pop some little white Nuvo drops right in the center of those flowers just to bring them to life and bring that white into the flowers a little bit. And that is my card for today. Clean and simple, and I had so much fun with this technique. I'll put all the links down in the description box below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, bye!